Hello and welcome. Today we've come so far. Today we are going to wrap a cabouchon stone with our weaving. So a cabouchon stone, just a quick review, is any stone that has a flat back and a domed front. Okay, these can come in any shape. This happens to be an oval, which is one of my favorite shapes. I have another one here that's round. Still has that flat back and domed front. These can come in a drop shape or a rectangle shape or sometimes really odd, weird shapes. But what makes it a cabouchon is this flat back and this domed front. And I might have said this before, but this shape is really popular in jewelry making because of this flat back. It sits against the body really nice. And it's not this big lumpy thing, but you get a nice big face in your piece of jewelry. So if you don't have a proper cabouchon stone, maybe you've just got some tumbled stones, pick out one that's kind of flat and maybe it's got kind of just a rounded edge on both edges. That's okay, that's going to work with this type of wrap too, but you really do need something that's got kind of an edge on it. It can be a fatter edge or a skinnier edge. Not all cabouchons are the same. Sometimes you get a cabouchon that's really thick, sometimes they're really skinny. So you really need to decide on your stone first, okay? And then we're going to go on to choose our wires. So first thing I need to know is how far it is, how long of a wire I need to make it all the way around the outside of my stone. So I'm going to bring in my handy dandy measuring tape again. This should hopefully seem somewhat familiar after our basic pendant wrap. Let's bring this around. Now, I usually just end up ripping this. Now, with this particular one, you want your tape measurement to be fairly accurate. So let's see how it comes around here. I end up usually just taking my flush cutters and kind of cutting it so that they match. And now I know where my straight line is. They're going to match pretty much exactly. You want this to be a fairly accurate measurement. So let's peel it off. That's the distance it takes to go around my stone. Now, how much wire do we need and which wires are we going to use? Well, I've done this a lot. I've got a lot of experience. I am going to do, now you can do any of the weaves that we learned in the last module. You can use your zigzag weave, your modified sumac weave, your plant weave, any weave, even some other weaves that you've maybe learned elsewhere, you can use for this. However, you do need to decide how many base wires and how thick those base wires need to be. I am going to do my extra modified sumac weave. I think that was one of the last ones you learned in the last module. If you don't remember the weave, go back and just do a quick review. But assuming you know the weave, I am going to put an 18 gauge wire in my middle as my middle wire. So I need the length of my tape plus 6 inches here and 6 inches here. So it's kind of the same as the the basic pendant, because we need enough length on our tails in order to make our bail and finish our tails at the end. So I've got an 18 gauge wire for my middle wire. I need 2 edge wires, and I think I'm going to go with a slightly thinner 20 gauge this time. I'm going to make one the same length. And then I'm actually going to make one just a little bit longer because that's the one I'm probably going to end up using to wrap around my neck. And sometimes there's just a little extra coverage that you need. So sometimes it's nice just to have a little bit of extra length. So I don't know, an extra couple of few inches. Cool. So those are going to be my 3 base wires that I'm using. But if you remember with this weave, this is my extra modified one. We actually need spacer wires in between our base wires. Where am I? Oh, they're here. I want to just quickly straighten these to get any kinks out. So again, I'm holding with my grabbers, so I get a really good firm grab. And I basically just run the wire through my nylon jaw pliers. Usually once is enough if you've got lots of hand strength. you might have to do this a couple of times with each wire. I'm sorry, I keep bumping the whole setup here when I finish, but let's just do this last one real quick. There we go. So now I have to decide how thick of a wire I want to use for my spacer wire in between. And that's going to depend on how thick your stone is. Okay, so I still need quite a bit of length, quite a bit of width. I'm going to try, this is an 18 gauge. I'm going to use a brass wire for my spacer wires because I find that that just makes the weaving a little easier. Now this is just a spacer wire, so we don't need a lot of extra length. I'm going to just make it about 1 inch or 2 longer than my tape, and that's as long as I need it. Again, I want to straighten these guys too. If they're all wonky, they're going to make my weave a little wonky. So let's just straighten those out. They're not maybe perfectly straight, but they don't have these kinks or lumps in them. So when I run my finger down them, it feels smooth. All right, that feels better. Let's just bring these in. So I'm going to have one 20 gauge, one spacer, my 18 gauge, my spacer, and my last 20 gauge. That's what my base wires are going to be like. There's going to be just a very thin space in between all of these wires. That space is going to be the thickness of our weave wire. I think I'm going to use 26 gauge. So I've got kind of 1 wire thickness extra on the back and enough on the front that it's going to curve over the edge of my stone enough to hold it securely. This takes some practice. If you're not sure if this is going to be wide enough, I would suggest going just a little bit wider just to make sure. And then after you do 1 or 2 of these, you'll be like, okay, no, that's too wide. But if it's a little too wide, it's just going to come a little farther around your stone and give you a little extra hold. So that's not a bad thing. If you underestimate and you get a really narrow one, we'll hopefully have enough tails to bring down and make sure that everything's secure. If you have a really wide cabouchon, I have had situations where I've actually had more than 1 spacer wire, where I've actually put 2 spacer wires in this space and 2 spacer wires in this space. It takes just a little bit extra to hold the whole weave flat, but it's absolutely doable. And if that's what you need to do to make this wide enough to capture your stone, then by all means. Another thing that I've also done is sometimes I've made these 2 spaces a different width for whatever design reason. So sometimes I've even added 2 wires to one side and had 1 wire in the other side. Or maybe I have a different thickness of wire as my spacers. So there's a lot of options, a lot of possibilities out there. All right, let's get into our weaving. I have my 26 gauge weave wire here. It's still attached to my spool, okay? So I haven't cut a piece of this off. I'm just working straight off of the spool. This is one of my 20 gauges. It doesn't really matter which one you start. Actually, let's start with our middle 18 gauge. I'm going to flip it around so that I don't have my bend from my grabbers here. I'm going to work within a couple inches, at least to start, of the end of my wire. And I'm going to start by coiling about 3 times. This is like tying a knot in your wire, remember. Make it a nice little coil. All right. There. We've got it coiled. Let's get everything out of the way. I'll bring this tape back. I need it for reference later, so don't get rid of it. It's just giving my camera a hard time focusing. There we go. Not a perfect spiral now that I can see it. Let's squish that together. There, that looks better. Okay, so this is my middle 18 gauge wire. I'm going to bring one of my spacers in on top. And then I'm going to bring in one of my 20 gauge wires on top of that. Now remember, the spacer wire, we don't actually weave around itself. It's just there to be a spacer. So we jump over our brass wire. We go all the way over the top and wrap around the top again, second time, and now we're bringing it back down to the middle, and I go around that middle one. Oops, a second time, right like that. All right, so now I'm going down this way, and my wire's in the back. I need to bring in my second spacer wire. It's Just orient it like that. And my last 20 gauge edge wire. One of the reasons I like using a thinner wire for these edge wires is because it makes a thinner lump on the edge of your stone. So that's sort of why I've done that. All right, get this wrapped around my fingers again. Bring this around this, just the end wire, remember. Bring it tight. Bring it around again, and then I'm going to wrap around this middle wire and bring it back up the other side of the middle wire. And let's keep going to the top. Let's go over that brass wire, jump to the top copper wire, bring it around, and now I'm halfway around, bring it around a second time. I'm just going to stop here, bring in my nylon jaw pliers, oops, come over top of all of this weaving that I've already done, and just squeeze. And that's going to make all of these wires flat and in a straight line, and make sure all your spacing between your wires is correct. All right, so let's continue on. I'll do a little bit of weaving just as a review, and then I'm going to probably just weave the rest where you don't have to watch me just be super repetitive. So let's bring it up on this side of our center wire. My center wire is doing all kinds of funny things. Let's adjust these. My spacer wire is doing funny things too, so let's get that there. That's going to be much easier to see, so it's always worth doing some tweaking. Still going around my middle wire here. Now around my end wire. Bring it around the end again, back to the middle. Up on the other side of the middle. Around the far top side. One time and two times. And on the back side of the middle, bring it up and back down. And now the bottom. And bring it around the bottom a second time, back to the middle. So I really like this weave. When you've got about an inch of weaving, I'm not there yet. I only have probably not even a centimeter. So, but you do want to tighten it up often. Let's do a couple more rounds just as a review for you guys. I don't want you to have to be confused. There. Around the top a couple of times. Oops, there we go. There, and again. This does get faster if you use thinner base wires. I don't know if you notice me running my thumb down here. I'm doing two things with that. For one, I'm pushing my weave wire in, but it's also touching the bottom of my base wires, and it's actually bracing those base wires so that as I pull, because I am pulling quite hard because of my handhold here, as I pull, I'm not bending those base wires out of shape because I'm actually bracing them. Even on the top here, I run that fingernail across my base wires, pushing that tight, but also bracing those base wires so I'm not bending them. These are kind of finessing tricks that you're going to have to figure out if you want to weave with thinner base wires. And thinner base wires are going to be cheaper to buy. Whether it's copper or sterling silver, they're going to look more delicate on a finished piece of jewelry. So they are a little nicer, and it's always nice to have the option of being able to weave over thinner base wires, but it does require some patience and some technique in order to do that without bending those base wires. You notice I'm keeping them very, very, very straight. I have not bent anything here where I'm grabbing on. You'll notice that my grab hand is always moving up. It's always right here. I'm not holding back here trying to weave over here. That's going to for sure bend your base wires. This holding hand is right here. And I'm just bringing things around. Always bracing my weave wires. And in the middle, you'll notice that when I go down, I tighten it. When I come back up, I tighten it. Around the end, you can kind of go down and back up and then tighten it. But in the middle, you don't want to go up and then down and try and tighten this. You can do it, but it's going to be a lot harder, and the chances of you having a little bubble back here go way up, okay? So instead, it's good to tighten this often, especially on the middle weave where, let me get around there, here, tight, go through again, tight. Doing that in 2 separate stages is just going to help make everything tight and work good. So I've got maybe almost 1 centimeter of weaving here. Once you've got about 1 inch, you're going to find that these edge wires don't slide as well. So once you've got about 1 inch, the middle one slides, these spacers slide, but it's just these edge ones that after a while, already these are giving me grief. It's because there's a little bit of extra space and these weave wires start binding when you start pulling on these. So because this is already giving me grief, I'm just twisting, twisting, twisting. I'm going to adjust all my base wires into their final positions. I'm going to grab these guys too. I tend to keep them just a little bit shorter. And now if I bring my tape back in, what I want this to look like, the edge of my weaving, let's see if I can get this to focus, is on the edge of the tape. And now I want my base wires to have 6 inches over here and 6 inches over here. So I have not pulled these through far enough. I'm going to spend another minute and work these through a little bit more. Sometimes this just takes a little extra time. Oops. Just having trouble grabbing onto these long wires. I'm getting close, a little farther. Alright, so let's bring this back in. My weave got all loose, which is normal when you slide these base wires around. So let's tighten this back up. And there, I don't know if you can see that, probably not with the camera, but I do have kind of a similar amount over here as I do over here. So that's going to be the final position of my base wires. These spacer wires are going to come out before I'm done. They are just that, they're just spacer wires. I'm kind of just shaping them so that they're all nicely lined up. Okay, from here, I need to start weaving. It's going to be a little more awkward because I've got these long tails. There's not much I can do about that, but let me just do a little bit of weaving so I can show you. You kind of have to give yourself a little bit of extra weave wire between your hand and your weave. And now when I do this, like I kind of have to do an extra twist around my thumb in order to suck up that extra weave wire. Let me get rid of this so my camera stops focusing on it. There we go. Bring this around again. There we go, down around the bottom wire here. Tight, and I'm bracing that wire. Bring it around the bottom again, around this middle wire, and then back up. This takes a lot of practice. In the beginning, you're going to find you're going to fiddle a lot more in order to find the right gap between your wires. This gets a little faster with some practice. Get that one in the right spot. Back around a second time. And I kind of have to do some funny things with my weave wire hand in order to suck up this extra gap, but you're gonna figure that out pretty quick, I hope, and find a system for doing that. Let's tighten that all back up. All right, I'm going to just continue weaving until my weave, once it's all compressed and tight, is exactly the length of my tape. So I am just going to continue this weave, 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 weave. These are going to kind of come together and lay really nice until my weave is tight and fits on my tape. So I will come back when I've got this weaving done. I hope that's super clear and we can continue from there. Okay, welcome back. We are ready to do the next step. I just spent the last hour upstairs finishing this weave. That's as even as it can get. There are sometimes little gaps on the edges here because the edges aren't tight, compared to the middle, but we need that in order to do the next step. So at this point, we have exactly the right amount of weaving. I know that because I made sure my tape was accurate. If anything, it's just, you know, ever so slightly short of your tape. You don't want it to be long. In fact, I was upstairs weaving this. I didn't have my tape next to me the way I usually do, and I actually wove an extra amount. Now I've got really kinked, messed up wire because I actually had to unweave a little bit so that it was exactly the right length as my tape. You do not want extra weaving. You do not want not enough weaving. You kind of really have to nail this and get just the right amount of weaving. So I'm there. I've done that. I am ready to pull my brass wires out. They are not going to live in my final project. Oops. I need to twist them a little bit. These should still slide. Let's see, do the other one. There we go. Put those off to the side. I tend to keep these around and keep them near my workstation because I'll reuse them in other projects. At home where I do this, I have a whole pile of these kind of straightened wires in different thicknesses so that depending on how thick my stone is, I always have just the right piece to make this just exactly the right width. So right now it's very flat. It's very flat because as we were working, we were kind of going over it with our nylon jaw pliers and making sure that it was really flat because that's how we kept this even space in our weave. Now, however, we don't actually want it to be flat. We actually want it to curve around the front and the back edge of our stone. So to do that, you can either use bullnose pliers, and you basically come in and you grab halfway across this gap, and then you bend. I actually make a little indent here. And you just do about 3 or 4 wires at a time, and you move on, and you keep going all the way down this side. These are not the only pliers you can use for this job. I often do this with the back edge of my bent nose pliers. And the benefit that this gives you, there's kind of this funny curve. This is much harder because I'm going across more. But when you do it with this, it actually starts to impart a little bit of curve in your weave, which isn't necessary, but it is a curve that's already going in the right direction. So it's not a hindrance either. So I just tend to go with it. So I've worked down one side and I've got a distinct indent all the way along here. I haven't missed any wires that are poking up. Okay. Now I need to turn it end for end and do the same on this side. I'm going to go back to my bullnose pliers. The second side, because this side has already started curving around, you don't have quite as much leverage. So that's why I went back to my bullnose pliers. And I'm just going to work my way along. This indent is going to end up on the inside of my wrap, so you'll never see anything. You don't want to like grip really tightly with these pliers because you don't want to damage any of these delicate weave wires. But you do need to grip hard enough that you're kind of shoving that corner in. And you just work your way along until you get to the other end. There we go. All right, now I've got another little ridge inside here. Can I kind of see the edge of that? You see how it's starting to kind of cup a little bit. At this point, depending on the shape of your stone, you probably haven't bent it around, so this still bounces back and forth a little bit. That's pretty normal at this point. I don't know if you can hear that. It's jumping over that middle wire, which is still a little bit of a lump. This is normal. So at this point, you really do want to do this next step with some nylon jaw pliers, just because you have to put a little bit more force on your grip here. And again, you really don't want to be damaging this thinner weave wire. But basically what we need to do, this takes some strength and some control, okay? I am going to hold this straight up and down, and I am just going to squeeze gently. Oops, sometimes it twists like that, so you just let go and twist it back and try again. The straight up and down is really important to make sure it's not going to twist. And I'm just going to slowly, whoops, work down my wire. I've only done this little bit right now, but I'm just going to see if I've squeezed it in enough. And I can tell because I'm trying to shove this back and forth, and you don't get that bouncing anymore. It's wedged in this U tightly. So that's actually a really good width. So I just need to continue and very, very gently squeeze these two edge wires in just a little bit. See, it's a little bit skinnier here than it is here. It's subtle, so you have to do this gently, a little bit at a time. And I'm just going to keep working down. I'm almost at the other end, so again, flip it around and get this last bit. It's a very gentle movement, just in a little bit. And now I bring my stone back in, and again, I make sure that I've made it about the same width all the way along. I got a tiny bit of a wide spot there, but it's not too bad. That's actually looking not too bad. I feel like right there, got a bit of a wow. It's pretty subtle. So just super gently move that in. Sometimes this needs to be twisted so that this like indent is even. Otherwise, you know, if you do this, it's not gonna capture your stone. So you have to just constantly adjust it so that indent is up. This is still bugging me, this spot. There. Really, really gentle, controlled strength. All right. We have our cupped bezel ready to start shaping around our stone. So let's bring our stone back in. This is the point where you have to decide which side is the top and which side is the bottom, and how your stone will be oriented in the final pendant. If you want to mount it sideways, go nuts. This is now your bottom. I think I want to mount mine this way, so this is going to be my bottom. So if you want to measure this, you can, but I basically grab somewhere close to the middle on either side. And now I'm going to also grab the bottom of my stone. This takes a bit of practice to do this grab with one hand. And then I kind of brace my stone and I start shaping this weave around the bottom of my stone. Now, you have to do this slowly because as you go, you'll be like, oh, one side is higher than the other or vice versa. Also, if you have a really sharp point, say you have like a teardrop shape and you want to put this point at the bottom, if you've got a really sharp point down here, as this gets narrower, this starts to open back up. All the squishing we did to get it in, sometimes when this is a really sharp bend, it starts to open back up. And as you do this, you have to kind of come in and just squeeze it a little bit again. So just double check to make sure your stone can't bounce from front to back, and make sure this U comes around tightly around the edge of your stone. This actually isn't looking too bad. I just wanted to let you know some of the troubleshooting. I'm going to keep going. If one side was higher than the other, you just twist your stone a little bit and bring that side around a little bit more until these are the same height. Go. Now I'm going to start even bringing them around the top a little bit, making sure that that like U inside your weaving is grabbing the edge of your stone. Okay, I can't go too much farther than this because these are starting to cross and give me grief. So let's deal with that. I've got my nice bullnose pliers again. Even though I've U'd this and kind of made it bend in, I'm just going to come back in and grab across all of these. And I want to put a sharp bend in it. This is going to be the bend where all of our wires come straight up out of the top of our stone. So I'm kind of bending and then pushing down against the stone, and then bending a little more and pushing down against the stone until I've got something like that. Cool, that actually is starting to look really good. Let's do the other side. I'm right-handed. I find it's always easier to do the other side by flipping it over. All right, let's just grab across all of these. If you want, you can bend these individually if that's easier for you. If it's too much strength to do all of these at once, then do them individually. All right. That's my back, that's my front. At this point, we got to kind of just take a look. If you've got too much weaving, then your stone is going to be loose. If you have not enough weaving, you're going to have a gap up here. A little bit of a gap is okay. We can cover that with our wraps around our neck, but too much gap is going to be an issue. Let's just flip it over. I got something wonky happening here. This side hasn't folded around the back of my stone, just in this one area. Here it's doing it, but there's something funny going on here. So this still pops apart. Super easy to take your stone in and out. Let's just squeeze this closed. That probably happened when I squeezed across all three of my wires. Just close that up again a little bit. All right, see how that goes now. This side here, I actually want to twist a little bit. Twist away from me. Maybe just in. So these are really minor tweaking adjustments. This comes with time and experience to know what needs to happen and where. I feel like right here it's not grabbing enough. And it's kind of a matter of, you know, that twisting that was happening earlier? That's kind of what's happening here. It's just a little twist in your weave, which brings it around the front a little more in one spot than the back. So very gently, kind of just manipulating that around. Let's see what happens when I shove that back in there this time. That's starting to look pretty good. I'm pretty happy with that. I did mention that when your weave is straight, you've kind of got little gaps on your front and your back, you know, your edge 20 gauge wires. The reason you need that tiny bit of a gap is because now those two 20 gauge wires are inside, are making actually a smaller circle than this outer one, and that those gaps allow this to happen, okay? If you didn't have those gaps, if your weave was tight across all of your wires, you couldn't get this cupping action to happen. Yeah. All right, so let's continue on. I am going to cut off my weave wire tails because I don't need any more. I tend to leave them on until this point because sometimes if your tape measurement hasn't been just bang on and perfect, you'll get to this part and be like, oh, I didn't fold this around my stone evenly, and now I've got a gap here and too much weaving over here, and now I need to unweave this and weave this a little bit more. If you really need to, you can still do some weaving here. You just got to be really careful you're not pulling those outside wires together when you do that. Let me get rid of this other wire here. I end up talking so much I forget what I'm doing. There we go. Let's get rid of that. Okay. Sometimes, anytime you cut off a wire, these ones are going to all get covered up, so I'm less concerned, but you just don't want any super pokey bits. I think that's going to be okay. All right. And at this point, the front and the back is probably pretty similar. It should work either way if things are looking good. If it doesn't work both ways, that's okay. As long as it works one way, you're doing okay. Cool. Okay. That I'm happy with when this is squoze together. I don't know. I'm sorry. Bad English. When I squeeze these together, my stone is tight. It can't move. It's not jumping around. It's actually tight in there. Only when I squeeze them together. Now it's loose, of course, but that's what you want, is when these are tight together, your stone should be tight inside your wrap at this point. I've got 6 tails sticking up here. 2 of them are the middle 18 gauge ones. One of them is one of the 20 gauges and it's longer. And that is the one that I'm going to use to wrap my final neck. But right now, I kind of just want to hold everything together, okay? So I'm actually just going to bring in, I'm going to cut off that mangled bit of wire and put that aside. I'm just going to bring in a short piece of 26 gauge. You can coil 3 times to tie your knot in one end. Or if you haven't cut off those tails yet, you can actually just use the tail that's still attached to the spool. But if you have cut them off, that's okay too. This is what you would do. I made that coil up here where it was easier to work. Now I'm going to slide it down to where I need it, which is right down on the bottom. Let's get our stone back in there. And I hold everything tight, and my stone feels good and tight. And you might even want to just bring your bent nose pliers in here and tighten everything up. That never hurts. Now I'm just going to wrap this little wire around everything, I don't know, 4 or 5 times, 3 or 4 times. This is going to kind of establish how tall your neck is. I think that's about good. That's enough wraps. I'm going to just pick one wire, coil around there 3 times as well to tie another knot in the bottom. There we go. Press that down, pull, pull, and I'm going to cut these tails off because I don't need those there. Make sure you're only cutting your tails. You don't want to cut anything extra off. There we go. Okay. Now there's no more bouncing around. My stone is tight and secure. I'm happy that that's captured, but now we still need a bail and all of our finishing touches. So from here, this is my long 20 gauge, my longest 20 gauge wire. I'm going to bend that off to the side. That's the one I'm going to use to wrap around my neck to cover up any mess that we have here. My other 20 gauge wire that's in the front, I'm going to kind of bend forward a little bit, and I'm going to bring that over top of my bail as my third bail wire. My 2 middle wires, these thicker 18 gauge ones, are what I'm going to weave my bail with. So I'll shape those in a minute. But let's work on these last 2 thinner 20 gauge wires at the back. Honestly, I tend to not design with these ones. I tend to just pull them up, give them a good hard pull, and then bend them down over top of this thin 20 gauge wrap that we've got. And I'm going to bend them down, pulling on them as sharply as I can. Okay, from here, I actually cut them off about here so that they come to the bottom of this little wrap around my neck. From here, I want to just push them in, grab them, get them as tight to that neck as I can. Sometimes you can even grab the bend on the top and like squish it as tight as you can. Now this one kind of came around the back. I do not want it on the back. I want these bent over the side so that when I weave my bail and I bend it around and bring it down over the back, sorry, it doesn't have this extra lump to go over. You want these off to the side so that your bail can come down as flat as possible, and we'll do some designing with those 2 wires. All right, so I've dealt with those back 2 wires. I've got a plan for these front 2 wires. Let's go back to our bail wires here in the middle. I find the perfect measurement for a bail length is from this knuckle to this knuckle. That's for my 6 millimeter inside diameter of my bail, which works for the necklaces that I happen to make for this. So this isn't written in stone. If you want a smaller bail, then by all means get your own sense of measurement, but this is a handy tool that I just happen to always have on hand, and it gives me a good idea of where I want, how long of a bail I want to weave. So I need to shape these wires before I start weaving them, and I kind of just use my finger to make some gentle curves. You don't want these too wide, you kind of want them fairly even, and I'm using my handy dandy gauge to judge the distance of them. And I'm happy with that. That actually looks like it's going to make a really nice bail. However, these are crossed on the top, and that makes it really confusing, so I'm just going to gently bend these out again, a little past where the end of your bail is. So the end of my bail is probably here, and I've bent them a little bit past there so that that's not going to hinder my bail shape at all. Cool. So from here, I'm going to do a figure 8 weave. And I'm going to make you watch this time. I know you didn't get to watch all of this other weaving, but in the last video I showed you how to do the figure 8 weave, so hopefully this is a little bit familiar, but we did it on straight wires. When you have a curve in your base wires like this, there's a small other dynamic. So I'm just going to stick my tail in. I got to coil 3 times to tie a knot so that when I cut that tail off, I'm not going to like lose the end of my wire. All right, that was 4 times, but that's okay. And I'm going down in between my wires. So now I can come back to this one. It's up to you if you do a double or a triple. I think I'm just going to do a double. I'm pushing that down tight with my nail. So 1, 2, bracing my base wires and pushing it down tight. Back to your first side. 1, 2. So this first part is actually the easiest part. As these base wires get wider, and as you pull this weave wire tight, it actually wants to help suck this weaving, these coils, down to where it's skinnier because you're pulling your wire tight, so it naturally settles into the skinnier area comfortably. So this is great. We're working away, we're working away. It's slowly getting wider. But when we get past the halfway part and our base wires start coming together, then you get a very different dynamic happening. And every time you pull your weave wire tight, instead of wanting to suck down like this, up here it actually wants to suck up. As you pull your weave wire tight, it wants to go to the skinnier area. So that's something we have to fight against. I'll show you when I get there how I do that. But you notice that even at this point, every time I finish my double wrap, or even a single one, I push it down, I make sure that everything is tight, and I don't wait 2 or 3 rounds to tighten, to snug up my weave. Okay, when I'm doing this bail, I need to snug it up every single wrap. These uneven base wires sort of dictate that you have to do that. When you have parallel base wires, this is a lot less crucial. All right, I'm almost getting to my midpoint. Oops. Sometimes it's good just to see how I hold things and how I work. I still, of course, have my weave wire going through these fingers so that I can get this tight pull every single time without fatiguing my hand. All right. I'm getting to the midway point. And as you do this, as your weave wires start to come closer, not only does this weave want to jump up higher and not compress like before, but also your base wires are going to want to come together more dramatically than you want to let them. So you kind of have to fight against that and keep these a little bit straighter. Bring my handy dandy measurement back in. I'm not quite at the halfway point. I just got to keep going. Dur, dur, dur. Sometimes these take a minute. Once you get good and you have lots of practice, I mean, I usually spend a couple hours making one of these pendants. But remember, I've had a lot of experience, and if it takes you 5-6 hours the first time, it's probably just because you fought with your weave a little bit and you had to undo it and redo it a couple of times. That's just part of the learning process, so don't stress over that. That's completely normal that this will take longer in the beginning. Like with any job, the more you do it, the easier it gets. Just had to straighten that out a little bit so I don't lose my width before I want to lose it. All right. All right. So it's starting to get skinnier here. And I'm starting to have to pay a little more attention that it doesn't get too skinny too quickly, because I still need to weave some distance here. And if my base wires come together too quickly, my bail is going to look funny and uneven. Remember, the bail is the part of the pendant that goes around your necklace, the very top of the pendant. It's really important that your bail end up on top of your jewelry piece and not behind it. If you mounted a bail back here, your piece is actually going to sit like this, pointing like down where nobody can see the beautiful stone. By having the bail on top, it actually hangs straight down the way that you would expect a bail to hang down. All right. Just want to do a little bit more. I'm making sure that every weave gets tight as I make it. This gets faster with practice, so don't worry if you can't make it look this tight and go as fast as me. With some time and some practice, you can. Sometimes, if you don't have as strong of fingernails, or maybe you don't want to mangle the end of your fingernail like mine always gets, you just got to bring in your pliers more often. I find it's just faster to work with the tools that are already attached to my hands. The great thing about fingernails is they always grow back, although they're not too pretty in the meantime. So if you're the kind of person that needs manicured hands, fingernails at all times, you might find you don't really like wire weaving because it is hard on your fingernails. That's just normal. So, I mean, spend 15-20 minutes, maybe even a half hour the first couple of times weaving your bail, but the reaction you will get with these woven bails will be well worth the investment of time. People are always super impressed when you can say that you wove this yourself and how even it is. All right. Even if it's actually not very even, most people don't know that and can't see that. I'm getting pretty close here. I'm going to go just a little bit farther. I'm letting this come in the last little bit. Now, this figure 8 weave, it really doesn't work well when these base wires are like right touching. So even though I'm letting these come together, I still want to just leave a tiny little bit of space there because this weave just doesn't like it when these base wires are tight. This crossing of this weave in between the wires just needs a tiny little bit of space. So just leave that space in there, and your weave will be tighter. If these wires come right together, you're going to get gaps in your weaving on the edges, and that just doesn't look as nice. I'm pretty close there. I'd say that's probably good. I'm going to right this point. It's kind of a subtle bend, but I think that's pretty good there. All right, let's pull on this tail and cut it off, making sure not to cut anything else off, just this one tail. All right, right in there. If it is showing or itchy, get in there with your pliers and fix that. Just bend it down. I can't feel that at all. That's what I want. All right, here's the front of my pendant is here. I'm going to bend this just over top of all this wraps and stuff. I'm going to bend it forward. Something like that. It's not quite 45 degrees. Or it's about 45 degrees. It's not quite 90 degrees. I'm sorry. I'll get this right yet. I'm ready to bring in my bail making pliers. I tend to use this 6mm one. So I want you to be able to see what I'm doing here. And then I bring this around, this smaller one, and down the back of my stone, just like that. I'm going to come in with my bent nose pliers and just squeeze that so it's tight. Cool. I've got this one that I bent forward. This is kind of not my very long one for wrapping around the neck, but this is the one I bent forward. It's one of the shorter ones. And I'm just going to bring it up around my bail, and it's going to just nicely fit in the groove in the middle of this figure 8 weave. I'm going to go back to the back, and I'm going to squeeze that middle wire down, which is another reason to just leave a little bit of space between these two bail wires, because now I've got room for this middle wire in between them. All right, I am happy that this bail weaving has come down far enough that I can cut off my weave wire. Make sure that you don't have any tails. I cut a wire off, so double check. I didn't cut that off very short at all. Wrap that way around. I'm still not happy with that. Let's see. If you can feel it, it's no good. All right, that's better. All right, so my neck is all pretty tight. I've squoze it all together. I don't know how to say that in the past tense, apparently. And I've got one long wire left, and this is the one I'm going to use to wrap around my neck. All right, it's coming out of the top, so I'm just going to wrap around the top, and I am holding these bail wires on the back as I do this. Come around the front and just keep going, making sure to lie your wire down right next to the last one. And I've got lots of wire here because I left some extra at the very beginning, so I can kind of come around. I like to come down low enough that I cover where these wires come together. That's my own personal preference, but then you kind of have to bring it up around the shoulders and then down around the flat, and up around the shoulders and down around the flat, up around the shoulder, down around the flat. You kind of end up with this shape. And I'm pulling this wire pretty firmly as I do this. And I really like how this shape just finishes off the top of my pendant. Okay, so I'm almost out of wire here. I need to start figuring out where to poke this in. What do I have? I do have a 20 gauge piece that I've cut off from the back two wires. So I need to find a place where I can tuck my wire end. That's okay. What do I have in the back? I feel like that's going to be my best spot right there. I've got less options with this design, but I feel like that's going to be my best bet right there. So I'm actually going to undo this to here. All right. Make sure. So if that's bent there and that goes there, this is what's going to tell me how much wire to cut off or where to cut my wire. Okay. You don't want to leave it just a tiny bit longer. If anything, you want to leave it just a tiny bit shorter. Now I need to come in and make a sharp bend. So you got to kind of pull a little bit to make that sharp bend. Grab back on. Whoops. There we go. Pull it down and tuck it underneath. You can kind of get to there. From here, you got to be careful because if your plier jaws slip and rake across all of these, you're going to get tool marks. That will probably happen once or twice before you figure that out. This takes a lot of control, but I was able to just squeeze that, anchor this jaw over here or in my bail or somewhere, and just squeeze that in so that it's tight. And I know there's enough room for that because I measured it before I did that. Cool. The front is looking good. A little crooked on the bail, so just move it over so it's not. We've got our three bail wires, I'm sorry, at the back. They were base wires, now they're bail wires. So, you know, it's all a matter of what you call them, I guess. let's just do some designing. I don't know. If you've got some like interesting features on the back of your stone that you don't want to cover up, that might be a consideration when doing this. I don't know. Let's do this, this, and this. If you're not comfortable cutting all of those at once, that's pretty normal to start with. I do it because I know I want them to be about the same amount difference. This one might be a little long, but we'll see. I can always cut it off later. But I know that these are, I know how much different these are, which I like. Once you start curving these around, it's harder to tell, harder to make sure that you're making them different lengths. If they end up really close to the same length, it's going to look really unintentional. But if they're not close to the same length, it's going to look more intentional that they're different. So remember, where every time you grab on to make a P-loop, you want that wire to be flush with the edge of your wire of your plier jaws. Make my P-loop, make sure it gets all right closed up, and now I can bring this around. Let's see, I'm just going to squish this together. Yeah, I like that a little better. Got the last one. Let's see what it does. I might have to cut a little bit off, but it might be okay. So close up my P-loop. This is a thinner wire, so oops, it's already going to look different than your other two anyway. But that's not bad. Yeah, something like that. So from here we have to sew. It's just a little bit trickier because of these spaces in here. We're going to use our same 26 gauge wire. If this gives you grief, you can go to a 28 gauge wire, which is just a little bit thinner. And now, when you're sewing, you always want to start closest to where they come out of your pendant and work towards the end of your wire. So I am going to put my wire underneath here and coil 3 times. Oops, 1, 2, I make this look easy, it's not, 3. All right, tighten up my coils a little bit. Cool. Now, even though it's up here, I'm going to slide it around over here. Bring this inside and over. Now I'm all set up to sew this through here, but I need a tool. So I'm just going to pause for a second while I grab my tool. I'm back with my super highly specialized tool. It's a tack. I know it's not really that highly specialized, but it's perfect for what we need to do. So, sorry, I had to run upstairs. I'm out of breath. I am going to decide. Again, I like my three stitches, so I have to decide which 3 openings I'm going to go through. This will be my first one, and I'm literally forcing my tack through. You can see it poking out on the inside there. And I'm creating a space. You can actually see that space, okay? Bring this around. Now, I got to get that to poke up. Sometimes you can get it to just poke up. Sometimes you have to lift this side away from your stone and make a little bend in your wire so that it pokes up. Whew, let me catch my breath. All right. And then I'm ready for my next stitch. So I come back in, and I actually use this very high-tech tool, i.e. my tack, for every single time I need to sew through this weave, because it's just not worth fighting with it. Sometimes you can get it to poke through without this, but it's actually just faster to do it every time. All right, this last one didn't go around my spiral. Just wanted to poke out here, but that's okay. I'm going to pull it tight, and I'm just going to bring it underneath of my spiral. So it did go under my spiral. You can kind of see my 3 stitches. I need 3 more spirals, coils under here to tie a knot in this end of my wire. You don't want to be losing all these stitches that you just put in there. All right, this is my 3rd coil. There we go. Before you cut anything off, brace everything, but pull these really tight. Now get in there. It's the tips of your pliers against the stone that's going to get you the best, closest cut. These ones on the inside of your spirals are always a bit tougher. Do your best to get in there, and then always come back after and smooth these cut ends down. If you can feel them, they're no good. I can't feel any scratchy bits there at all. So there's my first one. Let's show you that a couple more times. I'm just grabbing, I don't know, about 6 inches of wire here. Let's work on this short one next. I'm going to put my tail in there, go around here 3 times. Oops, hang on. Everything's sliding around. I like to get my fingernail underneath of that spiral to help direct everything around. And this somehow ended up underneath there where I'm not going to be able to get it later. Pull that tight. All right, let's get that underneath there again. There we go. 2, 1 more. There we go. That one went real easy. 3. All right. Make sure those coils are good, nice and tight. Slide them around to the outside here. Bringing my long tail across again. Now I'm ready to decide. Let's see. 1, 2, 3, I think. So let's do this one. I've got a big gap there, and now this will go through no problem. Get it to poke up right where you need it to. Pull it super tight. Don't be shy here. You'll be surprised at how hard you can pull on a 26 gauge wire without breaking it, as long as it's not too fatigued. And there's for my second stitch. There it goes. And my last third stitch. There it is. Okay. Good. All right, make sure you pull that good and tight. Am I going to have room for my spirals here? I'm actually just going to close my P-loop a tiny bit more. This takes some control, but I've just given myself a tiny little bit of room in there for my last 3 coils. Sorry for the weird angles, but that really helps me do what I need to do. I'm kind of just putting my fingernail under there and running the wire around the back of my finger, and my fingernail underneath of there just like kind of shoves it in behind that wire. Pushing everything back down to the stone. All right, I'm ready to cut this off. Let me just pull this one up too. Make sure there's no slack there. Get in there. Always, 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 when you cut a tail off of a finished piece, like that's totally a scratchy bit until I fold it over. That feels much, much better. All right. 1 more down here and we'll be done. Grab another 5 or 6 inches. You actually only end up using about 1 inch of this, but the other 5 inches on there is your working wire, and it's just going to make the whole thing easier. If you try and do this with like just 2 or 3 inches of wire, you're not going to have all this to hold on to, and you're not going to be able to pull tightly without using pliers. And though I love my pliers, they just take a little bit more time to pick up and put down. If I can do something with my fingers, I'm always going to use them first. All right, slide this around. I feel like I bent this a little bit. I just want a little straightening there. Okay. Bend it around. There we go. Bring it over. Now decide which 3, or if you don't want to do 3, if you want to do 5 or 6 or 10 stitches, decide where you want to start and just start sewing. Need to bend that to get that tip up. There we go. Next one. Oops. There we go. tight, bring it around again. One last one here. There we go. Okay. There's my 3 stitches holding everything together and in place. I just need 3 more coils to tie my knot in the other end of this wire. That's it there. I make that look super easy. That takes practice. All right, pull, pull, cut, cut, and always, 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 after you make a cut end, go in and make sure you don't have any itchy bits. Run your thumb over it just to be sure. That's it. We are done. Ta-da! Thank you so much for watching. I hope you learned a lot in this lesson. There's a lot of steps here, so if you need to watch this a couple of times, please do. This is probably one of my more complicated weaves, so you do not have to do this weave on your first pendant. If you really took to one of the other weaves, maybe the zigzag weave or the plant weave, do that weave instead of this one. All of those weaves that I taught you in Module 3 are going to work for this pendant in Module 4. I hope you've enjoyed that. Have a great day.